Hey, Stephen Yanni here doing the Junkyard Crawl at Bernardston Auto Wrecking in Bernardston, Massachusetts with, you know, an old frame. You know, if you're like me, until recently, I'd see something like this, it's got to be an old Ford, you know, Model A or Model T. It's always an old Ford. You got to remember that there was a lot of other companies making cars other than Ford. In fact, this is a 1932 Plymouth. Yeah, it's a Plymouth. Now, we know the difference because we can add up some clues, which we'll do. Now, Plymouth, of course, arrived in 1928, which again was the first year for the Model A Ford. And by 1934, 1 in every 4 cars on the road in America was a Plymouth. So from 1928 through 1934, they really took on the major car makers. And again, Ford and Chevrolet and Plymouth were the big ones. Now, Plymouth, of course, was Chrysler Corporation's budget car, below Dodge, DeSoto, and of course, Chrysler Imperial. And these things were all 4-cylinder powered until 1933. So let's dig in a little bit. Now, one thing that we know marks this as not being a Ford, and by the way, we can hear Queen Katie of Bernardston barking in the background until she stops. But that's what that is. Anyway, adding up the clues. Okay, and a Ford, this would be a torque tube, not an open drive shaft. So again, we know that the Ford, the rear is gone here, but the Fords, of course, had a transverse leaf spring, a banjo axle, and a torque tube that would have gone to the back of the transmission. So the open drive shaft tells us right there it's not a Ford or a Chevy. Chevy also had a torque tube at this point in time. So Plymouth, again, and Dodge would have had the open drive. You can see right here the parking brake is right here on the back of the transmission. Yes, that is a brake shoe that clamps down on the parking drum, so to speak. When you pull on this, it engages that lever, clamps it and locks the car on the hill. The starter, where's the starter? Well, this little pedal right here, you push on that and engages the Bendix drive in the electric starter. And this is also something that was standard equipment on Plymouth, whereas at Ford, you paid extra for an electric starter for the first 20 years. So again, standard equipment on Plymouth. Of course, hydraulic brakes, seen on this one here, the clutch pedal here, but here's the brake right here. And if we come around to this side, Shane, we'll see the hydraulic cylinder, this thing down here, that is the hydraulic brakes right there with steel tubes. And this is something that Ford wouldn't have until 1939. Of course, the Model T and the Model A had rods and cables. Meanwhile, over at Plymouth and Dodge, you had hydraulic brakes like this from the start. Now, one thing that's kind of cool about this one is this is a dual side mount spare tire car. One here, here's the stand, one there. I mean, how cool is that? Dual side mounts were typically seen on V16 Cadillacs, but you could dude out your Model A, yeah, or your Plymouth with dual side mounts if you wanted to have a baby luxury car vibe. And of course, in Plymouth land, the window glass would roll up and down. This here would be the crank. And if you look at it, it has a little gear train right here that rotates this shaft here, another gear, and it would raise and lower the side windows. So again, this is a pot metal of some kind. It's frozen up here, but again, a far cry from the old slide up and down window seen on Model Ts back in the first 10 years of the Model T. Kind of cool. And of course, we also see here the wire spoke wheels. Wood wheels were a possibility on Plymouth as well. Disc wheels also a possibility, but the beauty of this kind of a wheel here, unlike a British spoke wheel, which has an adjuster, these are kind of, you set them and you go. You can straighten them if you get bent, but they're pretty rugged wheels. And the engine itself, we look at this, and we see something on the top of this, the word Silver Dome. So without a doubt, this is a Plymouth engine. There was also a red dome, which is the high compression version of this for a little extra money, but this was painted silver. You can see remnants of it, but the Silver Dome was the standard 4-cylinder Plymouth engine. Again, up till 1932, all Plymouths were 4-cylinder powered. 33, they finally went to a 6-cylinder. And in fact, this right here, 1932, the final Plymouth 4-cylinder powered anything until 1971, when the Plymouth Cricket, which was a Roots British captive import, that arrived, and finally in 71, Plymouth had another 4-cylinder car, but the final Plymouth 4-banger. Speaking of which, this is an excellent book here by Willem L. Wertman, who was and is Chrysler's chief engineer. He was in charge of the Hyperpack Slant 6, worked with Tom Hoover, the Max Wedge, etc. But in this book, they have all the cool stuff. And in fact, Wertman's pictures in the back of here, man, Katie's going crazy. I love her, but I don't love her sometimes. There's Willem Wertman right there, lives in California now, a great guy. And on the screen of his computer, that's an aluminum block Slant 6. I did some stories with Willem Wertman, smart guy, still very much alive and well. But in this book, here it is. This is a cutaway of that engine. This is the 1932 Plymouth PB 196 cubic inch 4-banger. It's a flathead, and we can see the elaborate induction and the air cleaner and the carburetor, which is an updraft. And let's take a look and see if we can find them here. And yeah, it's all gone. The updraft carburetor would have lived here, but there would have been that silencer, the box, which would have come up in this direction here. But something that's really interesting to see is how the exhaust and intake manifolds are held on with a long stud and a little sort of clamp, which traps both exhaust and intake, pinches them to the head. Got two of them here. You wonder if it leaked much? Don't know. And of course, a little distributor right here, like that. A little tune-up in need here. Probably a little water would be not such a good single point. There it is. But again, this would have, the plug wires go through here. And it's interesting too. A lot of people say in hot rod land, never run your plug wires on each other like that. They crossfire, you break a crank. Well, you know, there's a 6-volt system right here. So the reality was these could probably spark all day long, just wouldn't run well. It wouldn't break anything. But again, auto light spark plugs right here in the top of the flathead engine. Kind of cool. And this does have a water pump. It's not a thermosiphon. That would have been something a little bit before this time. But coming around to the front of this, we can see, unlike a Ford, which would have had a transverse leaf spring and a beam axle, this has a beam axle, but we can see parallel leaf springs under the frame right here. So again, a little more, you know, a smoother ride, I suppose. And more importantly, unlike a Model A or a Model T with that transverse axle, which has a whole lot of body tilt and lean, this is more stable, keeps the car from rolling left and right and having yaw. Now, the front of the engine is telling, while there is an electric starter on this, this is your plan B. This little snout flange here would accept a one-way tang on a hand starter. You'd give it a twist, fire the motor up, and that was your plan B in case the battery failed. Coming around here, we can see the earlier version of an energy-absorbing bumper. Here it is right here. Spring steel, bent in a crescent on both sides, so when you hit the bumper, had some ability to collapse and come back. This is, what, 50 years before the 1973 mandatory 5-mile-per-hour bumper with the goofy shock absorbers. So they were trying even then. Generator right here, 6 volts. Keep your lights bright. And the lights would have lived right up here, and there's that. And again, the starter motor right there, which was standard fare on all Plymouths. And again, over in Fordland, the first 10 years or so of the Model T, you paid extra for an electric starter. So next time you find a frame in the junkyard, don't say, just an old Ford, because there was plenty of other cars. There was Oldsmobile, Buick, and Nash, and all kinds of different stuff. And this one here happens to be a 1932 Plymouth, the last of the 4-cylinder cars until the 1971 Cricket. So if you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Seatmax YouTube channel. Give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and by all means, hit the button or the bell so that you know when the next video comes out, which is